out there to Los Angeles in 72, 73. It was a Parsons official with a small office near the Jet Propulsion Lab and Caltech area in Pasadena. And he said, well, Ray, now that, we've lost these project files, we're supposed to do, which is you're supposed to just go on, resume your ordinary life. And Andy, you're not supposed to talk about this stuff. And then they had me teleport from Pasadena back to New Jersey. And initially I refused to go because I was afraid I was going to end up in Ohio because we had driven from New Mexico to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And they finally said, Andy, the thing will take you all the way to New Jersey, so just jump. And my dad practically pushed me through the device. So there was that breach of security and an initial kind of security threat where the project went black, but it had to have been resumed because then in 1972 we found ourselves back in New Mexico on the project. But in 74, 75 time frame, my dad said that, it fell apart like a house of cards. Mm-hmm. And then he explained how, the people in the project were supposed to be constantly reporting in with each other just to make sure that they were containing the project within this web of individuals with connections to the CIA, essentially. And yet, when I think of, DARPA's establishment of the Total Information Awareness Program during the Bush administration, one has to wonder what was reestablished, in the 30 years between 1971 and 2001.
Yes.
When I think of Donald Rumsfeld's behavior on 9/11, we know that he had his desk placed on the opposite side of the building, right?
Yeah.
He had his desk placed on the opposite side of the Pentagon, and we know that there seemed to be some prior knowledge by the U.S. government of the event, not as some inchoate national security threat from current intelligence, but something a little bit stagier than that. And I think some of that wariness or that awareness that a major, domestic Pearl Harbor was coming may have actually fomented some of the concerns that, the U.S. government planned the event. I don't take a position because I found Jim Marr's treatment of the subject extremely compelling, that it could have been an inside job. Mm. In his book, Inside Job, and then later the Terror War.
Yes, War on Terror, yes.
War on Terror, the Terror Conspiracy, the second book that he did on 9/11. I think we have to be vigilant that our democracy was not subverted in that way, and that we didn't have, the loss of those 3,000 people in the building by some Reichstag fire that the U.S. government or some faction of it launched, for example, to pass the Patriot Act. But I think we have to really seriously investigate that and see if it, in fact, was an inside job.
Yes.
But I really don't know at what point the project was resumed. But it had to have been during the 70s, because then in 81, I was taken to that teleport at El Segundo, at the CIA facility in El Segundo, and I was able to get all the way to Mars. In fact, in a room, when we had been teleporting 10 years previously, in the 69 to 72 time frame, we were jumping through a device, and we didn't have any room or barrier around us. We were entering this illuminated chasm in the fabric of time-space. It was like having an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience. But in 1981, when I teleported to Mars several times, it was actually in a room like an elevator that went with you. Mm-hmm. So teleportation, clearly the development of teleportation had not only continued during the 1970s, but had become much more sophisticated by the time that I jumped to Mars in 1981. So clearly there was an effort there during the Nixon and Ford administrations, where I imagine individuals like Donald Rumsfeld were scrambling around to reassemble the project, and apparently it did get reassembled. It at least got reassembled based on, in terms of the teleportation component of the project. I'm not so certain that the Chronovision was recaptured, but it must have been, because the devices didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just because they had some collapse of their intelligence network as a result of somebody dying or some threat to operational security, clearly the equipment was still sitting around these defense contractor and federal defense lab locations, and certainly would have been of interest to people who found them and didn't know what they did.
Oh, of course.
So
yes.
I think the project continued and was quickly reestablished in the mid-1970s.
Wow.
Maybe later,
yeah.
but certainly by 1981 we were teleporting again, so it had to have been reestablished.
Absolutely. Well, I would think so. They would never let this go, so to speak, especially considering the advantage, again, that you can have with the technology like this. It's just incredible. And Andrew, why don't we do this for now then? We begin here to end things with this time, and we'll set up a part 2 program here off the air on so we can continue talking more about Mars, the future. Again, there's just too many questions to finish up for this time. But let our listeners know how to get more information and where they can go on the web and so forth if they want to read more about your story.
Well, I'm starting to talk about Project Pegasus. Just as I'm lecturing about what's on Mars, I'm also beginning to lecture about my experiences. I'm sure there'll be more of that when my book is completed fairly shortly here. The Mars writings are at exopolitics.com and also at my Facebook group, which is called The Discovery of Life on Mars. So I would invite everybody to join Facebook and to join that group, or even do a friend request and become my friend on Facebook. I'm starting to comment about more of the quantum access issues related to Pegasus in that context. And Alfred Weber has just published a piece in which he talks about the experiences that Arthur Newman, who is a Project Camelot whistleblower, and myself had teleporting to Mars. And so the connection between the time travel technologies that the U.S. government is in possession of and has been in possession of for 40 years, and the fact that there are bases on Mars is beginning to be told. Alfred just published a piece yesterday for the Examiner. He's the exopolitics examiner out of Seattle for the Denver Examiner.
Yes.
So I would urge you to follow the writings of Alfred Lambermont Weber for the Examiner. He's done a number of excellent pieces about my work and our joint efforts on behalf of the Mars Anomaly Research Society. I think the full story of Pegasus is going to have to wait until my book comes out, but I hope the public can be patient, because I've got the whole story. I mean, I have an insider's account of the early days of time-space exploration by the U.S. government. You know, what they were concealing in terms of time travel technology and the research and development project that made it possible right around the time that they were heroically, sort of triumphantly heralding the landing on the moon. I think in some sense, especially now that recently we've seen Buzz Aldrin make a call for the colonization of Mars, when in fact we've already essentially colonized it, or at least have bases there, demonstrates one of the aspects of this whole story that we're going to have to make sense of and evaluate. And that is the possibility that the conventional space program has been used as a disinformational cover for the time-space program. I mean, my writings will show that projects Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo had a secret sister, and that sister was Project Pegasus. And if you evaluate even the Greek mythological connection there involving Apollo and Pegasus and so forth, you see perhaps some of the linkage there institutionally. But when I consider the fact that they're still using some of our space heroes to conceal the fact that Mars has already been visited and that we have a technology to reach it, we've reached it, and either built bases there or cooperating with Martian individuals in terms of using their facilities there, I'm troubled by that fact. I think that's a debasement of our space heroes. You know, they were getting aboard rocket ships that could have blown up. And so certainly their journeys to the moon were more heroic than my safe journey to Mars via teleportation. And it just troubles me. Buzz Aldrin's daughter, his beautiful daughter Jan, who has a lovely soprano voice, just blessed us by singing at one of my sister's weddings in 1980. Mm-hmm. And so we know the Aldrin family. At least they were friends back in the 70s and 80s. And Jan did a wonderful rendition of the 12th of Never at my sister's wedding. And so I have nothing but respect and affection for individuals like Buzz Aldrin, who were the heroes of the space program. But the people of the United States have a right to know the other technologies and the other journeys of exploration that have been taken by their fellow citizens in the furtherance of science and technical development on the one hand, and national and perhaps even international security on the other. And so I'm not making these announcements in besmirchment of any of our space heroes, But I think it's important that everybody start participating in the discourse